Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Want to live in a van? Consider these things first. Now, I'm doing a video today with some advice for you. Some of it you may have heard, but some of it I'm really pretty sure you haven't heard because I don't hear anybody talking about it. And these are things that I'm dealing with right now or have had to deal with while living in a van. So before we get to it, I just want to thank my patrons and invite everybody to come over to my Patreon site and help support this channel. The link is in the description below. I also make upcycled, recycled clothing. So if you want to check out some of my funky wares, you can find the link for my Etsy store also in the description below. So welcome to the video today. Now, the first thing I want to say that's really important is do not get a van that you can't stand in. And of course, I live in a van that you can't stand in. It's a 96 Dodge 2500 van. And this may be a situation where after you've lived in a van for a while, it really sucks. But because I've lived in the vans for like 7 years and none of them could I stand in, this has become the biggest factor to what's the most uncomfortable about living in a van for me. The fact that I can't stand and that I'm crawling around on the ground all the time is just becomes insane. All of my pants have dirty knees. The constant bending down when you're getting dressed or moving around the van on your knees as you're grabbing things and cooking or whatever you're doing, it's ridiculous. My biggest piece of advice, do not get a van that you can't stand in. And that's probably half of us out there. Now, I don't want to do a video here where I'm talking about all bad stuff. So that's not the intent of this video. I just want to bring some good advice to you. So you really have to think about, what is it actually going to be like living in a van? Because in our YouTube videos that we show you, you can only show so much. You need to take the time to imagine what it's going to be like actually being in a van hour after hour after hour. Like, what are you actually going to be doing with your time? Because you're not always going to be hiking around with your dog. You're not always going to be at the RTR, There's just going to be a lot of downtime depending on what your work schedule is like. So, this brings up a lot of different things. One of them is, do you have some hobbies that you can do? Hopefully income generating, have something that you're into. Again, hobbies or whatever it is, because you don't want to be a person that worked your whole life in different jobs and then you retire and move into a van and then you're like, well, what now? And you think, well, I'm just going to, sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais. But actually, And retirees know this, you're going to want to actually be doing something. And I'm sure you have a lot of ideas if you are retiring of all of the things you've been wanting to do. So sort of imagine what that's actually going to be like in a van. Can you do it in a van? So what are those things that you're going to be doing that you're going to be enjoying? I mean, do you crochet? Do you whittle? Do you paint? Do you write articles for magazines? What are you actually going to be doing? It's a real consideration. And by the way, watching YouTube videos about being a nomad or van life is not a hobby, and being online 24/7, it's not healthy for us. And another thing that you might not be thinking of, and people have talked about this, but it's a really important aspect of van life. Are you the type of person that can spend a lot of time alone? I mean, this is very important. For me, I am quite a loner and a homebody. So living in a van alone, I've always been quite isolated. I mean, I don't have a husband or children. I also have worked for myself for so many years and by myself. That's isolating as well. So I'm kind of used to it, but there is a factor of loneliness living in a van, and it can be a real challenge. We don't want anybody getting depressed out here on this grand adventure. So it's something to consider. Maybe you want to make contacts back at home, close friends or family that you're in communication with while you're out here on the road. Maybe you want to, get involved with the caravans or do more of the desert camping, BLM, RTR, where you're going to meet people. But there's still going to be a lot of time where you're just with yourself. But now on the flip side of things, if you haven't spent a lot of time alone, it's a really important thing to be able to do, to spend time with yourself and really get in touch with yourself, and being alone allows you to do that. So sort of not only just spending time with yourself and getting really comfortable with yourself and with that time, but also to remove the fear of being alone so that you experience what that's like. It's really going to help you to grow, as I say, get to know yourself. And that's one thing that van life or nomadic life is going to help you do, and something you're going to have to contend with and consider. Sort of on a related note is this issue of privacy, and I think other nomads have talked about this. You really have no privacy when you're living in a van. Sure, you can close all the windows. Sure, you can, unless you're out in BLM land or a forest and you're out there by yourself, then you're going to have some privacy, potentially. But I've found, being a van dweller that lives in towns, there's always going to be people around. You're always parked somewhere where, you're not in the safety of your own particular home. You're always out on the streets. You're always out in the parking lots. There's always vehicles around you. There's always people walking by your van talking. I mean, if you're not woken up at night by the late night partiers, then you're woken up in the early morning by the early morning bird watchers. I mean, either way, it's just so hard to get that privacy, and not only the noise and the constant goings on, but also this sense of a lack of privacy. So that's been one thing that's been pretty hard for me. Well, one thing I do want to mention is sort of physical health, and the ability to move around, because especially living in a van that you can't stand up in, it's really going to be wearing on your body. I mean, van life will kick your butt. It'll kick your butt in general. And if you're not able to stand up and you're crawling around and you're up and down on a regular basis, you're going through this hole here, you're leaning down, you're it's ongoing. And if you're not in the best of physical shape, that's really going to wear on you. And I would suggest that if you can, start preparing for that before you move into the van. And I really believe in stretching as a point of health. And it's really served me well in this lifestyle, because stretching just makes sure that you're stretching out your muscles so that you don't pull them. And then also all the driving and sitting in the front. Stretching is a piece of advice I want to give you to make this van life easier. But physical health and physical fitness is an important factor when considering this lifestyle that I don't think enough people talk about. And if you're not already physically fit, this lifestyle is going to help you do that, because you're not going to be hanging out in the van all the time. It is a much more outdoorsy lifestyle, because you're going to be getting out more. You don't want to get cabin fever staying in your van all the time. Now, related to that is a topic that I don't think people talk about: clothing. This is so important. What kind of clothing do you wear now? Are you in a job now considering van life and it's office attire? Or are you the type of person that's not that outdoorsy and tends to be a city person, and you have the type of clothes that are nice? You're walking around on cement, so your shoes don't have to be hiking boots, and you can wear clothes that you don't have to run in or climb and hike in, So then you're not really going to be prepared unless you have clothes for more of an outdoor life. And I would say living in a van, it really helps have much more comfortable clothes that are more stretchy. Also clothes that are very adaptable. I wear a tank top all the time under whatever I'm wearing, or just the tank top. And then if I'm wearing a bra, I just take that off at night and wear the tank top. You might have to get up in the middle of the night at any time. So I like wearing clothes that are both jammy clothes and daytime clothes. Just real easy to get around, real easy to layer, real easy to clean, and just really comfortable for bending all the time. Also, like I said before, you're going to wear through your knees probably, always being on the ground. So that's something to consider as well. And forget about heels. You may want to have one pair of them with you in case you go out to dinner with some friends or something somewhere. But yeah, heels are pretty much out of the question. So also the color of clothing, I would step away more from lighter clothing or white clothing. It just doesn't do well in this lifestyle. I mean, you're literally like, you think about it, when you're in a house and you exit the front door, there's like a cement walkway leading to your vehicle or leading to walk through the neighborhood. You don't have that in a van. You're going to be stepping out into whatever's there, a parking lot, grass, dirt. Right now I'm somewhere where it's like white powdery. So every time I come back into the van, there's like white powder at the entrance. It's something to consider. So related to that is makeup and like self-care and like hair. Obviously, I don't have to do much with mine. If you're a person who has a makeup routine in the morning, you might want to consider paring that down or getting into the habit of a shorter makeup routine, makeup and hair routine, because that's just going to make your van life a lot easier for you. So overall, you sort of have to adapt yourself to van life. Living in a van is going to teach you to simplify everything. This brings me to another point that I do really want to talk about, which is cleanliness. I think it's really important in this smaller space where it's sort of harder to access things. You're going to have fewer things that are like multi-purpose. It's really important to be clean and organized and to clean on a regular basis. It's a really good idea to have a place for things and things in their place so that you can find them when you need them. Whether that be in the middle of the night in the dark or with a flashlight, or just during the day, as I said, as you're functioning around. So if you're not much of a cleaner now, that would be a really good skill to develop before moving into a van. And you'll certainly have to get into the habit of it once you're in the van, because otherwise it's just going to drive you crazy. And even if you're not like OCD like me, but just a regular routine of cleaning is something that I've seen a lot of gross vans out here. It's just going to be really helpful to you to have a cleaning routine for your van. Unless you live in like a Sprinter or a really nice RV, and obviously we're on an adventure traveling vehicle, or we're retired and, you have a really nice rig. If you live in any kind of regular van, you are going to be considered homeless by other people. So a lot of people sure think van life's cool, but no matter how cool it is, you're going to have to contend with a stigma about living in a van. And it is real and it is out there. So you need to ask yourself, are you the type of person who can just give no cares about what other people think? And that is really hard. And it's something that will come up in van life if you're living in a regular van. Like my van has a little paint coming off of it. There's a little rust on that side. I work for myself in the van half the time, so it looks like I'm doing nothing. So you will get that from the community. So you got to be strong in your van life. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things here that people don't talk about that I'm dealing with right now. And they're very important about living in a van, especially if you live in a van for a longer period of time. Now, the first thing is, have you ever considered the fact that if you live in a van, for a year, 2 years or more, that you're not going to have a rental history anymore, which is super important to be able to rent a place. So if you're living in a van for a period of time and then you want to go back to renting, this could be quite a challenge because you're going to have this gap. And sure, you can tell them, yeah, I lived in a van, I traveled around the country, I did a YouTube channel, I did all of this stuff, and it's great. But technically speaking, they don't give a care about any of that. You just don't have proof that you rented, say for me, for like 6-7 years. I don't know how long it's been. Yeah, I have no proof that I can pay you. So in a related thing, I've worked for myself for so long that I don't have any record of employment either. So that is really difficult as well. My resume basically reads, I did all these cool things for other people like 20 years ago, but for the last 20 years, I've just been sewing recycled used clothing and making videos online. Like, so if you want to talk to my employer, that's me. And how much did I make? Well, it varies all over the place. Did I come into work on time? Well, how do I show all of that? Unless you're planning on living in a van forever, which you might be, or any other kind of nomad, you're not going to have a rental history or much of an employment history, just depending. Something to consider. Now, another really big thing that nobody talks about is we all have to have a residential address. We have to live in a particular state, technically, in order to have a driver's license, in order to have a registration. And proving who you are and where you live has become much more difficult. And I've had quite a challenge with that. So I'm currently using a family member's residence, which is in the southern part of the state here. Right now, what I'm dealing with, and this is what you're going to have to deal with depending on what state you choose to technically have your residence in. What about jury duty? This is something I've been dealing with for the last 1.5 years now. I have postponed my jury duty 3 times now. And what it's going to mean if I can't either be accepted for an excuse, which I'm applying for now. The excuse is I live in a van and work in Humboldt County. I'm not at my technical residence address. So if I don't get this excuse, I'm literally going to have to drive down to Southern California in order to possibly fulfill my jury duty. What am I going to do with Bambi? The parking would be maybe $50 or more for me to go into a garage in the city downtown. I don't know what to do with Bambi. Am I going to kennel her? It's going to cost as much. In order to go in for the day, it's going to be a full day to find out if I even am fulfilling my jury duty for that. God forbid I actually get appointed to a trial for like a week or more. What am I going to do with Bambi? This starts to become actually undoable. I cannot afford to kennel her for a week. I cannot afford to pay for parking that would be close enough to the facility for me to go out and get her. So I'm hoping that they accept my excuse, but even if they do, it might bring up issues with my residential address. I can't change my residence to Humboldt County unless I actually can find a residential address here, which so far I have not been able to find. A P.O. box, which I'm using now for mail, is not going to cut it with the state of California. So again, do you have your residence in South Dakota? Are you going to have to actually go to South Dakota and serve on a jury in that state? This brings up another problem because I do live in the state of California, and you may need to consider this now in one of the states you're in, but you may need to consider it in the future because things are swiftly changing. Now, the thing I'm talking about is smogging your vehicle. This is so sucky because I've now had to smog my vehicle up here in Humboldt County, which is not required unless you're selling a vehicle. We don't have to smog, but because my residential address is in San Diego, I do have to smog. So this year I had to smog my vehicle up here, and thank God it passed, but it required a lot of time and money to do that because first I had to drive a lot to make sure that my rig is not, suffering from not driving a lot, which happens. I had to add really expensive gas, and then I had to pay for the test, and I had to wait for that to happen, and I had to worry about it as it was coming up. Now, this may not be something you have to do in your state now. I'm imagining that at some point, all of our older vehicles, they're going to have stronger emission guidelines for those in other states, and California does lead the way in a lot of this stuff, which is a lot of good things, but a lot of crazy things too. So that's something to really consider. Just having an address in a particular state, what is that going to require of you? Because it's certainly going to require at least jury duty. This is my advice for considering moving into a vehicle. Maybe these things can help. Please like this video. It helps my channel. And please subscribe if you're not subscribed already. I'd really appreciate it. Hey, it's free. Oh, and check that you have your notifications on, because some of my viewers are saying they're not getting their notifications. All right, so have a beautiful day out there. Thanks for watching, and take care. Bye.